Hello, everybody. Welcome to Season 5, Episode 9 of the CR Sports Podcast. After Week 14 of the NFL season, there's a lot of talk about whether it be the Patrick Mahomes controversy with the call on Kadarius Toney and the Chiefs-Bills game, a big win for the Bills, or the Cowboys-Eagles game with the Cowboys taking the advantage in the NFC East. But big games this weekend, Garrett, and we learned a lot.
Yeah, both the AFC and the NFC wildcard races have really tightened up, especially in the AFC with 6, 7, and 6 teams, and then a plethora of 6 and 7 teams on the other side of the NFC. Some surprising results, as a matter of fact, as well throughout the week, which is why we find ourselves in this scenario with still 30 teams uh, still technically alive for the playoffs, which you don't really see with just 4 weeks ago too often. So we'll so try to recap every game, and then maybe we'll talk about the standings just briefly, as there's just so many teams trying to sneak into the playoffs, get that 6 or 7 seed, and in the NFC South's case, host a playoff game.
Yeah, let's start off first with what was your biggest thing you took away from this week in the NFL season?
I think my biggest takeaway from the NFL this weekend sort of put me on the spot right away, but
Well,
I
let's
think
pick
I
between
think
the
it
big
has to
two.
be it has to be the Bills game for
Okay,
me,
yep.
just because I sort of knew the Cowboys were legit, and I knew the Eagles had been falling off a slope recently. The Bills, if they're at 6 and 7, it was going to be really hard for them to make the playoffs. This year I've been a believer in the Bills. I'm not a Bills fan. I really don't like the Bills. I cheer for them to lose, but I wanted them to lose because I'm like, man, if they just string 3 or 4 wins together, they're going to make the playoffs, and that's not a team I want to face if I'm the 1, 2, or 3 seed at any point throughout the playoffs. And winning in Kansas City, Josh Allen's now 3-0 in the regular season there, just proved to me that this team is destined for the playoffs. And with the Dolphins losing last night, the division is still up in the air. And I think Joe Brady's just done such a better job, especially getting James Cook involved in the pass game, to the point where I can confidently say that the Bills are going to make the playoffs. And I think if they don't win out, they're only going to lose one more, which is really impressive considering all they've had to go through this year. And it was a tough week for Sean McDermott as well.
Yeah, it's crazy to say that as well as the Bills have been playing, you still look at them as a team that could easily miss the playoffs. They play Dallas and they play Miami. 2 games which they could lose. The Tyreek Hill injury, we'll touch on that later. That's a big piece into that game versus Buffalo. But when you look at the Bills, they really are one of the top 5 teams in the league, but the record just doesn't show it. They've lost a lot of close games, and you can blame that on Ken Dorsey if you want to and how the offense is managed early on in the season. But the Bills, they messed up, and that's going to be on them. They're a very good team. They're very dangerous, so you do not want to face them. And that win, because if they lost to Kansas City, their season would have been practically over. And now it sets up a big game this weekend in Western New York at Buffalo with the Cowboys coming into town, a game that I'm going to be going to as a Cowboys fan. So that'll be very fun to watch. But when I look at this game, it's not just what the Bills have done. I've looked at them and said they've lost a lot of close games. The Broncos game, that's a bad loss, and they're a team that should make the playoffs just because of how talented they are and how well they have played despite their poor record. Look at the end of the game. Kadarius Toney clearly offsides, right? And I wish the refs blew this play dead. I do. Because then it wouldn't have had all this controversy. You wouldn't have known that Travis Kelce made one of the greatest plays of all time. In case you didn't see it yet, it's a catch to Kelce over the middle. He breaks like a tackle, throws a lateral back. Kadarius Toney, he's right there and just runs it in. Easy. One of the coolest plays I've ever seen on the offense side of the ball. Unfortunately, there was an injury that took that away, and that's football. Or not an injury. Did I say an injury? A flag that took that away. And if you look at the replay, it's not even close. Tony is clearly lined up off sides. And Patrick Mahomes, he's coming off the field, and he is almost looks like he wants to take the ref's head off. He's getting held back by his own players. This is the guy that's supposed to be the face of the National Football League, and I lost a lot of respect for him in that moment. It's why he's attacking the officials when they threw the flag before the play even happened. They threw it as the play started, and then that was the outcome. If they had an incompletion, he wouldn't have been doing that. And I get his point where he's saying it didn't impact the play at all. No, it doesn't. But it clearly is a foul. It clearly is a penalty, and it's unfortunate that that was the play that was taken away, but it's the right call, and it's really a shame and kind of disgraceful for Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes after the game to be putting that on the refs. And then when I look at Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes meeting up at the end of the game, where it's usually, oh, great game, man, we'll see you, and hopefully in the postseason and play again, and just like good luck the rest of the way. That was the wildest explicit call I've ever seen. in my life, and that's just not fair. What does Josh Allen have to do with that? So I lost a lot of respect for Patrick Mahomes, and it was really disgraceful.
Yeah, I thought we were gonna wait till we cover the rest of the games to get into that big controversy, but I see you went on your little rant, so I'll sort of go on mine, and I pretty much agree with all of you said. I'll start with what you ended off with, talking about the Josh Allen scenario, and like you said, first of all, I don't think Josh Allen really cares. Like, when a game's over, you don't go complain to the other quarterback. You maybe you can. I don't think you should be complaining to anyone, but if you're gonna complain to your own teammates, complain to the refs, you're not complaining to the other team.
Tell Kadarius Toney to stop blowing games for you. He's lost them. In the Detroit game, he had drops, and there's been other games where he just has these boneheaded plays. Get mad at him.
Yeah, and I don't think there's any empathy for Josh Allen because how many times have the Chiefs been on the other side of this?
Yeah, I know, right?
Look at the Super Bowl. The last play of the game was a defensive holding. They don't call that every time. They pick and choose when they call that, and guess what? They chose to call it there. So, Patrick Mahomes, how about you have your win over the Bills and the Eagles have the Super Bowl? So, and like you said, Patrick Mahomes is the face of the league. So many little kids look up to him, and to see him acting like this is just tyrannical, and it's absolutely disgusting. Quit throwing your helmet on the sideline. Quit complaining to the reporters after the game. Quit complaining to Josh Allen. You're a big boy. You're a grown man. You can soak a play like this and move on. And I know, oh, it hasn't been called that much this year. It's only being called this year on the tush push. It's only been called two or three other times. It's a penalty. You can't do it just because they choose to call it sometimes and choose to not to. It's not like Kadarius Toney was 2 feet behind the line of scrimmage and they called it. He was offside. So I'm tired of Patrick Mahomes just whining, frankly, because it was a flag, and it feels like the refs try to give the Chiefs as many wins as they can. And now when the refs, quote unquote, favor the Bills, he's all over the refs, just trying to complain and throwing shade at them and complaining to the other team's quarterback who wasn't even on the field during the play. And it's like, you got to grow up. Like, you're the face of the NFL, and this is a look that you're going to give out. Like, that's the worst sportsmanship I think I've seen so far this year.
You're last year's MVP. You've been to the AFC Championship every single season that you have started at quarterback. You've won 2 Super Bowls. You've been to 3. And this is the guy that's freaking out in this fashion when it's not even a subjective penalty. It's not, oh, it could have been holding. There's holding on like a lot of plays that they could call and they sometimes don't in big moments. No, no, no. This is clear cut. This is as obvious as a call is going to get. He is clearly offsides, and it's unfortunate what happened. Don't kill the official because he made the correct call. That's outrageous to me, and that's really why I'm disgusted with him. And I lost a lot of respect for him. You look at a guy and say, "Oh, he's a true competitor. He really had that moxie that you hear him in the mic'd up moments. He can really lead a team." And he is the right guy to be the face of the NFL. I'm not so sure about that anymore, Garrett. And this team, let's zoom out. It's not just about Patrick Mahomes. They're sitting at 8-5, and he doesn't have good receivers. This is the big issue with this team. And last year he had Juju Smith-Schuster, a guy who I didn't really think that highly of. Maybe he was a lot better than these receivers that they have now. With Sky Moore being featured, he doesn't seem to be that good. Kadarius Toney, he can never step up big moments. It feels like it's Travis Kelce, an aging Travis Kelce, that's really just the primary piece for Mahomes, and it's really not working out in the passing game.
Well, I think everyone is just scared to admit it, but Eric Bieniemy really just elevated the Chiefs' passing game and took it to another level. The one guy they lost was Juju Smith-Schuster. They traded away Hardman, but they traded back for him this year. Juju's doing absolutely nothing. I know he's in a tough scenario in New England, but he had, what, 1 or 2 good years in Pittsburgh, and that was about it. He had a mediocre year with the Chiefs last year, but he's not a Pro Bowler. He didn't lose much from last year. You lost Eric Bieniemy, your offensive coordinator, and Sam Howell's a guy who's thrown the ball a ton, but he looks pretty good. The Commanders don't have a strong team, and Sam Howell's been able to look just fine in what is technically not his rookie season, but is really his rookie campaign with getting just 1 or 2 starts last year. So I think people are sort of trying to duck away from the fact that Eric Bieniemy was the driving force behind what was such an explosive Chiefs offense. And I think this Chiefs team is going to be fine moving forward. But if you're Patrick Mahomes, you can't act up like that, especially in a regular season game. And just the lack of sportsmanship and integrity, it really bothers me. Can't find another word for it.
Yeah, I don't blame you. I feel the exact same way. Let's go now to the biggest game that we saw in the NFC on the other side. It was Cowboys-Eagles. It was Sunday night. Philly, they came into Dallas, and Dallas winning 14 straight games going into this game at home, and they put up points at home. They averaged 40 points at home, and they did a lot of the same. They've been dominant at home. They've looked fast. Their defense creates turnovers. They created 3 on Jalen Jalen Hurts, Devontae Smith, and A.J. Brown, three of their biggest players for the Eagles. And Dallas got it done. A lot of talk into this one. Can the Cowboys beat one of those true contenders, one of those very, very good teams? And they did. And they didn't just do it in any type of normal fashion. They smacked the Eagles around, and there's no excuses for Philly. They got whooped in every facet of the game. Besides that scoop and score that they had on defense. Besides that, 6 points offensively for the Eagles, and Brandon Aubrey, 30 of 30 on his career for kicks, and Dak's MVP case is just growing.
Yeah, Brandon Aubrey, the Notre Dame alum, although he didn't play football there, he actually played soccer. But we've seen it all year. The Cowboys are just a different team at home. There hasn't been a single team who's came into AT&T Stadium and
Given a fight.
given the Seahawks last week gave them a little bit of a fight, but they
Besides
haven't
that.
given up much issues, especially on offense. The Cowboys' offense at home has just completely been a different breed. And looking at it from the Eagles' point of view, I'm not going to sit here and make excuses for the Eagles. They've definitely been reeling the last couple of weeks, and technically they're not winning the NFC East anymore. But if they win out, which would include a couple wins against the Giants, they can reclaim that title. But this Eagles team feels like it needs a bye week this late into the year. They've just had big game after big game and primetime spot after primetime spot, and they'll go Monday night primetime next week. It feels like they just need to get through their gauntlet and survive, and they happen to end it off with an absolute blowout against the Cowboys, who is probably one of the, if not the hottest teams in the NFL right now. So it really proved that if the Eagles can't win the division, going into Dallas is not going to be an easy place to play if they end up with that. Obviously, the 49ers now taking over the 1 seed. They look almost unbeatable right now as well. But this is going to be a really interesting couple of weeks for the Cowboys, taking their talents on the road, first at Buffalo and then at Miami, two of the AFC's upper echelon teams, despite the Bills' record just being 7-6. So it's a big test, and if Dak can get through those 2 weeks with pretty good stats, I think he's going to lock up his MVP case.
Yeah, I agree. And this is also a tough game for Philly next week, going to Seattle, across the country, with Geno Smith maybe playing after an injury. He was out this week because of a groin injury against San Francisco. So we'll see what happens there. And then if Dallas were to win out, they would obviously win the division at 14-3. But that's a tough testament. They play Detroit, Miami, and Buffalo. Those are all very good teams. Detroit, they've been playing pretty bad recently, and then Miami with a loss, but it's still a tough schedule compared to
and
the other teams in the NFC.
I know a lot of the smoke has been thrown on Jalen Hurts. He's a system quarterback. He's overrated. And I'm not going to sit here and say that he's a superstar, but you can't have your two best wide receivers fumbling the ball in a big game like that. Those are two turnovers that just can't happen. And if that happens in the playoffs, especially if you're playing a Dallas or a San Francisco, you can't like your chances to win.
And Garrett, I really took away that this might be, and I really believe that it is a two-team race in the NFC. It's San Francisco who's had the number on everybody and the number on Dallas recently in the past 2 years, and it's between them and the Cowboys. So I think it'd be really big for Dallas to at least get the 2 seed and win the division, because you see them at home. With that, if they were to get the 2 seed, I'd be fairly confident in saying that they could actually make the NFC Championship for the first time in 27 years since those Super Bowl era runs in the 90s. But on the other end, you look at San Francisco, and they've really just owned Dallas. There's no other way around it. This Cowboys team, though, I think it's pretty safe to say, and everyone's kind of agreeing with it, is that it feels different. You know that phrase has been thrown around a lot with the media and the Cowboys saying, oh, this is their year, they're elite. They haven't really strung together games like this. They haven't had strung together home stands like this, and games against teams that were supposedly superior to them. They've shown that they're not, and Dak Prescott's playing. This is where I really think it's the biggest part. Dak Prescott is playing at the highest level in his career, and it's not even close. He's never played this well on this long of a stretch. It's been games, and it's been consistency, and you want to say, okay, Dak, do it week by week by week, and he has since the San Francisco loss. So I think they've been a new team since then. Mike McCarthy's changed his game plan and how he attacks teams offensively. And as a Cowboys fan, I'm excited, but it's also at the same time, we could get the 5 seed and not be playing a home playoff game, and that's just because of a bad Arizona loss that you had in the early part of the year. But that shows how crazy competitive the NFC is at the top, where you could win 14 games and not win your division and play on the road against Atlanta or New Orleans or Tampa Bay in the first round of the playoffs. But if the Cowboys are 1 or the Niners are 2 or the Cowboys are 1, if it's interchanged that way, I really do think this is going to be setting up for a instant classic and throwback in the NFC Championship that everyone was accustomed to seeing in the 90s.
Yeah, it's tough because the 5 seed in the NFC, which would most likely be the loser of Dallas and
Yeah,
Philly in that division, it's pretty much on locks right now. It feels like a death trap just because I don't think that either of them would struggle too much with the NFC South winner. All three of those teams in contention don't look too strong, but that's a road playoff game without a bye week. And then the next week, you go to San Francisco.
Possibly.
Yeah, assuming the 49ers win out. I think they will.
Since they changed the seeding to the 1 seed
Yeah.
plays the
Well,
lowest
assuming
seed.
it's all chalk in the first round, you would then go to San Francisco with a team who just got a week of rest and a week full of game planning for Kyle Shanahan. Where if you got the 2 seed, you're now playing what's likely to be maybe the Packers or the Vikings or the Rams at home, and then you're getting, if it's all chalk again, like I said, then you're getting the Lions at home, who I don't think you can trust them in the playoffs right now. They still feel like it's a year or two early for them. So the difference between winning that division is it's really key, and I think Dallas is going to drop a game or two on the road coming up in their schedule, and I wouldn't be surprised if the Eagles did as well, because they just don't feel like they're firing on all cylinders right now, where it feels like Dallas and San Francisco are hitting the peak of their season at the right time.
So this is what I'm kind of intrigued about and questioning. I think I heard that don't count this as true yet. Let me hear what you say, Garrett. If Dallas were to lose to either Miami or Buffalo, an AFC team, and the Eagles were to lose, they only play NFC teams, I believe, throughout the rest of their schedule.
Yeah, they got the Seahawks, the Giants twice, and the Cardinals.
Right. So if they were to lose one of those games, and then they would both have the same record with 4 losses, and Dallas were to not lose to an NFC team, so not lose to the Commanders and not lose to the Lions, beat the NFC teams but lose to one of the AFC teams, and they have the same record, I'm pretty sure then it switches to where there would be some type it'd be completely different because it's the one loss right now. It's the Arizona loss that's really hurting Dallas because it's an NFC conference game. So that's kind of another key part. So if Philly were to drop one to an NFC team, that whole tiebreak completely changes.
Mhm.
So something to look for. But in my eyes, it's a two-team race. If the Cowboys get the 2 seed, I really don't see Philadelphia this year. I feel like they've slumped. They haven't been the same. Their point differential is like plus 20 something, I believe, and it's really not that high. Meanwhile, you look at the Dallas Cowboys and the San Francisco 49ers. They blow teams out when they want to. Dallas this season has eight wins by 20 or more points, and that's very impressive. And believe the Niners have 4 and the Eagles have 0. So it shows really great teams, really good teams. They don't just beat you; they knock you out. And that's been what the Cowboys have been doing, and that's what the 49ers have been doing. So it's really setting up for what could be a very great NFC Championship if the Dallas Cowboys were to get the 2 seed.
Yeah, and going back to what you're talking about, it really depends on who the Eagles lose to, because if the Eagles and the Cowboys have the same record and the Eagles beat the Giants twice, the Eagles win the division. Because even if the Cowboys were to beat the Commanders, if they're both 5-1 in the division, it then goes to conference record, which I believe the Eagles have the better conference record, which is why they would get in above them. But
that's why it'd be weird if
they,
you know what I
the
mean.
Eagles drop a game to the Giants and the Cowboys drop a game to the Bills, the Giants then have, or the Cowboys, excuse me, then have the better division record. So I think they would still get it.
But what if they drop one to the Seahawks and then Dallas drops one to one of the AFC teams?
Because the Eagles would still have the tiebreaker, I believe. Because all I know is if the Eagles beat the Cowboys twice, then.
But they haven't. They split.
Or I mean, if the Eagles beat the Giants twice, then. But if the Cowboys beat the Commanders and the Eagles beat the Giants twice, they have the same division record.
Right.
So
then it goes to conference.
If the Eagles drop another conference game, then they might have the same conference record. So then it gets interesting.
So we don't know what happens.
so
That's unprecedented.
It's a lot of chaos that could happen. But if you're an Eagles fan, the easiest way is just to beat 4 under 500 teams and win the division.
All right. Well, we laid it out. Those were the two biggest storylines. We basically talked about that for 20 minutes now. But we'll go to an instant classic. As Thursday night last week, it was the Patriots and the Steelers, and wow, Taylor Heineke and the Patriots, excuse me, and Ezekiel Elliott. Taylor Heineke, Bailey Zappi, excuse me, and they got the win in Pittsburgh. This is a big loss for the Steelers. They were chanting for Mason Rudolph, Garrett. I don't know how you can talk about this one. How do you feel about that game?
Yeah, it feels like the Steelers are on another mediocre road to 9-8 season. Kenny Pickett's still at least out this week, possibly more in the future, and with Mitchell Trubisky, this team's going absolutely nowhere. He provides no explosiveness to the offense at all, and the last 2 weeks, sitting at 7-4, you had a chance to get to 9-4 with home games against the Cardinals and Patriots. And when you drop both those games, it's hard to still have hope in this team, especially with the way the offense has been playing. After those couple of weeks where it felt like we were starting to piece some things together, and now we come back to earth in the last 2 games. The Steelers aren't making the playoffs, especially with how competitive it is right now. I know there's technically still the 6th seed, and they'll play the Colts and the Bengals, 2 of the other 7-6 teams, the next 2 weeks. But I'm expecting 2 losses as long as Mitchell Trubisky's at the helm, and it's really frustrating as a Steelers fan. Not for this season necessarily, but I wanted to see Pickett play the rest of the season so we could get a fair evaluation on if he was the guy moving forward. I feel like this injury just bought Kenny Pickett another season at quarterback, which is not what I want to see.
Be the worst team. It could be the worst thing for a franchise at times.
Exactly. That's not what I wanted to see. I wanted to see Kenny Pickett get a fair evaluation with an offensive coordinator who deserves to be an offensive coordinator in the NFL. Even now we have an interim one, so maybe he can piece things together when he comes back and he proves that he's the guy for next year. But I think we're going to move forward with him, which I don't know if that's the best decision, but it was just a disappointing couple of weeks, and it feels like it's going to be a pretty average end of the season, and maybe they sneak in if they get to 9-8, but it's highly unlikely, I think.
And then Bucks Falcons. I already mentioned it earlier, but there's 3 6 and 7 teams in that division, and one of them is going to host a home playoff game, maybe the 4th seed in the NFC. The Bucks, the Falcons, and the Saints, all 6 and 7. The Bucks got the win though against Atlanta, and this was a big win for them if they want a chance to be that team to host the playoff game.
Yeah, this is a really weird division because a lot of these teams are just getting their wins against the Panthers because they're just basing their wins off the fact that the Panthers are just terrible this year. And that's a huge win for the Buccaneers because it's a head-to-head matchup against the Falcons. So coming down the stretch, I think the Falcons and the Bucks and the Saints all have 1 or 2 more matchups against each other. I think the Falcons play the Panthers next week, so assuming they're going to get to 7-7, Panthers are the laughingstock of the NFL. It feels like an automatic win, and they're not even going to get the benefit of being that bad because their pick goes to the Bears. So it'll be an interesting storyline to follow. I know we like to rip on teams who are under 500 to make the playoffs, but it's never easy going on the road and winning a playoff game, and the winner of the NFC South is going to get to host one in the first round.
Yeah, it's the NFL at the end of the day, but this is a big game for the Bears. Beating the Lions, no one really saw this coming, and they did it pretty controllably, and the Lions have kind of been falling apart recently. They lost to the Packers on Thanksgiving. It feels like they always lose on Thanksgiving. Now they lose to the Bears, another divisional game. Just feels like the Lions, they haven't been the same team that they were in the beginning of the season, and my confidence in them at least has just been going down and down ever since.
Yeah, they almost lost to the Bears the week before that. Packers lost as well. Their defense has just been non-existent recently.
Right.
Their offense has been trying to keep them afloat.
And they allow a lot of points, it feels like, every game.
In the last 4 weeks, especially, they've been lucky to escape with a 2-2 record with wins against the Saints and Bears, 2 games that very well could have gone the other way. The offense I'm not too worried about. You're going to have games where you go on the road, and it's a divisional opponent. Your offense doesn't have the best game, but most of the NFC teams who they're going to be facing in the first and second round have pretty good offenses, and this defense isn't ready for it right now.
Yeah, I agree. Colts Bengals. You were talking about the Steelers playing both of these teams. Of Jake Browning, he has been the story. Look at him. The Bengals are winning games. They have a winning record. They beat the Colts pretty controllably, 34-14 by 20. Jake Browning, really impressive so far.
Yeah, I love what Zach Taylor's done. After that Steelers loss, watching Jake Browning, he had a good completion percentage, but he didn't force the ball down a field a ton. He still hasn't done that, but they've done a great job calling plays. They had a couple screen passes just go for like 60 or 70 yards. And this offense has finally gotten the running game going again with Joe Mixon. Jamar Chase, it felt like he was going to have a big fall off with Joe Burrow getting hurt, but besides that 1 week, he sort of kept up where he left off when Joe Burrow went out. And this is a Bengals team that I think we could see in the playoffs. I like what they've done with Jake Browning. They let him sit behind Joe Burrow, watch him for a year or two. They let him develop. It feels like he's a veteran, even though he's not really, just because he hasn't been thrown in some terrible situation. He's backed up one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, and they have a prepared game plan that's geared to his strengths, and he's been able to execute.
Yeah, and I think the win against the Jaguars the week prior was really the big one where you saw, wow, Jake Browning played really, really well. And of course, the Trevor Lawrence injury, and we'll get into that as we go into now the Jaguars and the Browns. Another loss for the Jaguars. That's two straight now. Trevor Lawrence playing, he's banged up, but he did play. And Joe Flacco, what a story for him. He comes out of nowhere all of a sudden, plays really well. He got the ball to David Njoku a lot. My fantasy team took full advantage of that with 27 points from David Njoku. Joe Flacco running the offense in Cleveland.
Yeah, it's a good sight to see if you're a Browns fan because it felt like such a hot start to the season and such a good defense was going to be spoiled when Deshaun Watson got hurt. And they tried to throw DTR in there, the second-year player out of UCLA, and he just didn't quite fit the puzzle piece that they needed. Joe Flacco's a veteran. He's not going to turn the ball over. He's not going to throw for 400 yards a game, but he's a guy who can maybe win you a road playoff game just because he's been there and done that. He's won a Super Bowl with the Ravens. And this Browns defense, it's going to carry them a long way. As the Jaguars were able to sort of make this game look close in the end, but
it was late.
It was the Browns defense really most of the way that was able to hold down Trevor Lawrence. I know he was playing on that bum ankle, I think it was.
Yeah.
But that was a big win for the Browns. If they had lost that one, they would have been right with everyone else in the pack of 7-6 teams. But that win sort of holding them up and separating them for now.
Yeah, and then we kind of already talked about this, but the Saints beat the Panthers. No surprise there. They're 6-7. They're tied with the Bucks and the Falcons. We can skip that. And the Jets, 0-0 game at halftime. C.J. Stroud coming in with people saying he's an MVP candidate. That kind of all got wiped away. C.J. Stroud goes out with a concussion later in that game. But the Jets win 30-6, and they put 30 points up. Zach Wilson now playing again. He was back and put 30 points up in a half. And they blew out the Texans 30-6. Surprise.
Yeah, I think we all learned that Zach Wilson, he's a comparable backup in this league. The Jets' offensive line just gave him no chance, and they gave the other two guys who they tried out no chance either. C.J. Stroud was without Tank Dell going into the game, and then Nico Collins got hurt, so two of his biggest weapons weren't there. But it felt like a missed opportunity for the Texans going into MetLife Stadium. If they win that game, they would be tied with the Jaguars for the AFC South division lead, but instead it's a Jets team who doesn't feel like they have any chance of making the playoffs. Still an outside shot of Rodgers coming back.
Yeah.
They stole a win, stole a game. Obviously they blew them out, but it was a game where it felt like the Texans needed it way more than the Jets, and the Jets were able to win it. So now the Texans just falling into that clump of AFC teams.
And you talked about the missed opportunity for the Texans. I look at the missed opportunity for the Jets this season. They have such a good defense, such a young defense, and losing Aaron Rodgers, it felt like the whole team kind of fell apart around that. And now you have the hope that he could possibly come back, but they're out of the playoff contention. And I know they could technically still make it with some miracle, but it just doesn't seem like it's going to go that way. And if you're a Jets fan, you're looking at the game and going, why couldn't Zach do this in weeks prior? Why we have a good defense, allow 6 points against a really good offense, and it just feels like it hasn't been there. So disappointment for Jet fans. And then you look at the Ravens and the Rams. Close game. This was in Baltimore. It went to overtime. A punt return that won it for the Ravens. The Rams, they've been playing a lot better recently, and I thought they were going to win this game. I really did. I feel like they outplayed the Ravens. The Ravens did not even play that well. It lost me a little bit of faith in the Ravens, but it also showed that the Rams have been playing a lot better.
The Ravens are just a team that's going to win 3 games in a row and look really good and then drop one where they don't look very good and you have questions about them. It feels like they go through that cycle 3 or 4 times a year. That was a nice job of them battling. The Rams have been really hot lately, and that's not a team I'd want to see in the first round if I was one of the NFC's premier teams hosting a playoff game in the 2 or 3 seed if the Rams sneak in. But to your point, the Ravens sort of, even though they put up 37, a couple of their touchdowns were just on like blown coverages, and then they had a kick return score. So the Ravens, although they're at the top, they're the 1 seed right now in the AFC, they don't feel like they're the favorite at all, really, right now. It feels like the top 4 teams, all the division winners, have sort of an equal chance to make it to the Super Bowl. And you could even throw a couple wild card teams in there. The parity in the AFC is as great as we've seen in recent years. But the Ravens did a nice job of fighting back and winning this one, and what was really a back and forth, one of the only exciting games in the 1 o'clock slate.
Yeah, look at it. We'll go to a different extreme on this end, Garrett. 3-0, a final score of the Vikings and the Raiders. I don't know what to say. Ivan Pace, he's been impressive at linebacker for this Vikings team. He had a big interception. But besides that, that's as boring as you're going to see in the NFL.
Yeah, there wasn't much to it. The only, I guess, notable thing is that the Vikings moved to 7-6, which puts them in the playoffs. But the Linsanity run from Joshua Dobbs is, I think, come to an end as Nick Mullins is going to be the starter next week. It felt like he was just riding a couple hot weeks, and then once teams really were able to game plan for him and prepare, his stats decreased, and the Vikings offensive output really went down. So they still have a chance to make the playoffs. They're in the playoffs right now, but I don't think Nick Mullins is going to be the answer. And I think at the end of the day, that Kirk Cousins injury is what's going to keep him out.
And Nick Mullins, a former San Francisco 49er, we'll go to that game here as the score was 28-16 with the 49ers on top of the Seahawks. Usually they split. Usually it's a divisional game that it feels like they split every single year, and it didn't happen this year. The 49ers with the sweep over the Seahawks. And it was close for a little bit. The Seattle Seahawks did have the lead. This is with Drew Lock. We talked about this a little bit. Geno Smith was out with that groin injury, and that was kind of the big loss for them. But Drew Lock did play okay. He played all right. He had a couple of picks, though. That was the fault of him. And Brock Purdy, he continues to play well. And Deebo Samuel's just been amazing.
Yeah, Deebo Samuel able to do it not only in the pass game but in the run game as well. This game felt like it was 28-16 forever as the teams were sort of just giving the ball back to each other. You had the scuffle between Dre Greenlaw and DK Metcalf as well, something to keep your eye on. Maybe a suspension could come the way
Fred
of
Warner was in there, too.
either one of them. Yeah, especially you wouldn't want to see either of those guys miss a playoff game for the 49ers.
Feels like this happens every game with the Niners.
Yeah, but
It's part of their mentality.
the 49ers, they got a tough, gritty division win, which you're never mad when you win a close division game. It's not always that you can blow them out. I know the 49ers knew they were the superior team, but they still won by 12, and they're able to keep pace with whoever wins the NFC East and get in the 1 seed.
Let's look at the Broncos game. They beat the Chargers. Justin Herbert's now out for the season, as we know today. And this has been such a disappointing Chargers team. Brandon Staley's just not a good coach. And the Broncos, though, they've been impressive with rallying and getting back into conversation and playoff conversation and the wild card race.
Yeah, and the offense has sort of been there all year long. I think people sort of just put that out of the picture because of how bad the defense was. They gave up 70 points earlier this year, and now the defense is one of the best in the NFL. The way they've just been able to rally, and that's the reason the Broncos are winning games, because you know what you're going to get from Russell Wilson. You're going to get 1 or 2 touchdowns. You're going to get 150 to 250 yards. You're going to get maybe a turnover. But when they're limiting the turnovers and that defense is playing well, the Broncos can beat a lot of good teams, and they've shown that, rallying from a 1-5 start to get to 7-6.
And then you had a Monday night doubleheader between the Titans, the Dolphins, and then the Packers and the Giants. And Tommy DeVito, it lives on, the Italian heritage showing out in New York and New Jersey. You saw his agent. He looks like a mob boss. This is amazing. What a story you got going on right now for the Giants. Their season has kind of come back to the front pages where it's like, whoa, look at DeVito. This is super cool, super fun. And then the Titans surprising the Dolphins in Miami. Derrick Henry was very good. Will Levis leading that game-winning drive, but it was the mistakes of the Titans that really allowed the Dolphins to get a lead. And then the Titans answered that, and 2 upsets. Titans with a win, 28-27 by 1 point, and then the Giants 24-22, 2 points. So very close games and surprisingly interesting games on the Monday night doubleheader.
Yeah, Tommy DeVito's a great story. I'm personally rooting for him, even though he went to Syracuse. Not a big Syracuse fan, but the Giants feel like they're just ruining their draft stock right now, winning now 3 games in a row. They were at 2-8, and now they're at 5-8. So teams have been passing them in the draft order. And maybe it'd be a different case if they didn't have such a bad start and they could still make some noise in the playoffs, but I don't think the playoffs are going to be calling their name.
No.
And Tommy DeVito's not the quarterback of the future in New York either.
It's a fun story that's going on for now, but
He's probably earned his role as a backup or
Yeah.
maybe a third-string guy on the roster, but Daniel Jones is going to be the guy next season, if not somebody else. And right now, the Giants are just spoiling teams' seasons, as Jordan Love looked really bad for the Packers, especially in the first half. He was able to pick it up, and that's the reason they were able to take the lead and force that game-winning drive from DeVito and the Giants. But that was a game the Packers can't lose, especially if they're trying to prove themselves as a legitimate playoff team. And then you look at the Titans-Dolphins game, and you see Tyreek Hill go out, and the Dolphins' offense just looked completely different. Tyreek Hill just adds a whole nother dimension to this offense, and the Dolphins' defense gave them multiple opportunities with the pick six. They had a couple other times where they set the offense up nicely, but Will Levis was able to rally the Titans, making his case maybe that he is the future in Tennessee, but it was sort of a must not a must-win for the Dolphins, but a game that they really, I think everyone knows they should have won, and
Yeah.
they got a 14-point lead late, and they just couldn't put the Titans away.
And then the games we already went over: Bills 20-17 over Kansas City, and the Cowboys 33-13 over Philadelphia in Arlington, Texas. And those are your scores for Week 14 of the NFL season. That's going to bring this episode to a close. Great episode, Garrett. Thanks for listening, everybody. And this NFL season, it's going to be a huge, tight race, especially in the NFC and the AFC. My eyes are on the NFC, obviously for Cowboys reasons, but it's going to be fun.
Yeah, my eyes are leaning more towards the AFC just because of the fact that
There's
the
not
Bills,
one, there's
the
not,
Bills are in 11th,
yeah.
and they're 7-6, which is just absolutely insane.
It feels like everything's kind of floating around, and there's not some clear-cut diagram or picture or whatever you can say.
That's what we want. When we look at Week 18, we want 3 or 4 teams in each conference to still be alive. We don't want teams resting guys and the playoff picture already set.
And I think we should mention this. I forgot to mention it earlier. The 49ers are the first team to clinch playoff berth. Nothing surprising there, but just thought we should mention it. They're at least going to be a wild card team.
Yeah, and we also wanted to mention our sponsorship once again, Molly V's in downtown Victor now with the storefront. If you happen to stop driving through the village of Victor, feel free to stop in. They now have delicious milkshakes that just satisfy your taste buds beyond belief. So always stop in there. Very friendly atmosphere and some of the best ice cream in Rochester.
Friendly indeed, and the best ice cream. I can agree with that statement, Garrett. Thanks for listening, everybody. This is episode 9 of season 5. So long.